We'll
Okay.
start with a traditional karakia in honour of our guest from Switzerland. Kia taonga manaakitanga I te mea ngaro. Ke runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahia tihua mā kihiki. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori. Kia tuturu, ka whakamaoa, kia tīna, hui e, tae ki e. And that is, let the strength and life force of our ancestors be with each and every one of us, freeing our path from obstruction so that our words, spiritual, power, love and language are upheld, permanently fixed, established and understood, forward together. Over to you, Jack.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverly, for that. And welcome everyone to our webinar, which is a continuing series in the Economy of Enough, sponsored by our Climate Declaration and DEGROWTH Aotearoa New Zealand, the Wise Response Society, and the Engineers for Social Responsibility. So invitations have gone out to all of these groups. Our topic tonight is, the question is, degrowth, the path to decarbonizing the economy. And we have with us Loren Kaiser coming in from Switzerland, and his colleague, I'm just going to check again to see if Mengu has joined us yet. Are you there, Mengu? No, she isn't. So we'll start and hopefully she can join us. Lorenz is currently in Switzerland doing his PhD in environmental science with a focus on ecological economics. And he earlier was involved in some research in Sydney, Australia, looking at some of the issues that we're going to be covering this evening, which is the application of degrowth perspective to integrated assessment models. So Lorenz, welcome. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this topic in the first place. You know, why bring together integrated assessment models and degrowth? What was wrong with the IPCC models that didn't include a degrowth perspective?
Jack, for having me and for the kind invitation. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. So for me, it all started, I think, back in 2018 when I was doing an exchange semester at the University of Leeds in the UK, and I had the luck to run into Julia Steinberger, who's now my supervisor. And I attended a lecture of hers on ecological economics, and which covered lots of things, but also limits to growth, and also a bit modeling, different perspectives on modeling. And at the time, I was searching for a bachelor thesis topic, and this got me interested in modeling a bit. So I was searching for a thesis topic with my supervisor at ETH in Zurich.
So you did this for a BA?
No, this was my BA was also focused on modeling, but it was like I analyzed data output from certain established integrated assessment models on like land use change. This was not related to degrowth per se, but it got me into a
Okay.
bit like reading modeling literature and
Right.
reading a bit up on integrated assessment models and what they cover and what they don't cover. And this was around the same time that the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees was published. And this made like a huge it made a bigger media splash, and I also dived into it, and I read a bit about on Twitter the debates surrounding it, and one criticism was that, hey, look, the scenarios, the modeling that the IPCC covers is very limited. So for this, I would like to make clear that sort of the IPCC does not conduct own modeling. It's just a scientific committee, a scientific group that summarizes the existing literature published by all teams around the world, and also in terms of the modeling. So what happened until then was basically that there were no degrowth integrated assessment scenarios being submitted to the IPCC, so they could not review them. Um, so it's more, I think, from this perspective, it's more a problem of the integrated assessment modeling community itself. And also, sort of there are certain standards that your modeling needs to fulfill in order to be eligible for the IPCC. And many of the scenarios on degrowth modeling that existed at the time simply was not eligible because it didn't have certain variables that were thought to be required for a submission. So I think there's different dynamics going on there.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Could maybe you could tell us just a little bit about what an integrated assessment model is? I think we
yeah.
all probably appreciate that it's some kind of computer simulation that gives us an indication of what kind of scenarios will lead to what kinds of results with respect to climate mitigation. But that's probably the extent of my knowledge. So can you tell us a little more about, what they are, how they work, and perhaps some of the limitations of them as well?
Um, Thanks for that question. So I think maybe also Mengyu, when she comes, she can say a lot more about this because she's really working with these models for a long time and has really dug also into their mathematical foundations and everything. So because like if you want to, so first of all, integrated assessment models are incredibly diverse. They basically encompass any model that features or that assesses or like features representations of different subsystems of the world. Basically, this can mean that you have very simple models. The first integrated assessment models were extremely simple, combining basically just a small economy model, which could include, okay, we have a population, we have a GDP per capita, we have some assumptions of how growth develops. And then you couple this economic module with, for instance, a climate module that represents, okay, how much energy do we use for the economic output, and how is this energy related to carbon emissions, and how is the carbon emissions related to temperature. So basically, you can have very, very simple integrated assessment models that just combine different subsystems of society. And current, like the big integrated assessment models that mainly feature in the IPCC, they are incredibly complicated. They feature lots of different submodules, like really detailed representation of the energy system with tons of different technologies. They feature land use change, biodiversity partly as well, water use, and also more detailed representations of the economy, with different methodologies, really. Some are more mainstream, some are also more like alternative economics, heterodox economics. So there is a very high diversity there.
Well, it's a whole
And
topic into itself, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah,
if you Mengyu now joined us, I think. Yes,
Oh, is Mengyu join us?
yes.
Oh, good. Welcome, Mengyu. I don't know if I can see you. Oh, there you are. Greetings. Why don't we just take a moment to welcome Mengyu and allow me to introduce her. Going to add you to the screen there. Now, Mengyu, I understand you are a physicist and you are with the ISA, which I forgot what it stands for in Sydney.
Yes.
Remind.
Yeah, it's a short for Integrated Sustainability Analysis.
Right. And it sounds like you've devoted much of your research to the integrated assessment models and applying them to degrowth and climate concepts.
Yes. Yes. So hello everyone. I'm sorry for a bit minutes late. I thought the
That's
timing
fine.
like the Australia time, so I thought. And
Right.
I was playing tennis, just finished, so I'm really sorry for that. And like
Not a problem.
that's great. Yes, so maybe a brief self-introduction. So I'm technically speaking, I'm trained as engineer. I was doing power system engineering since 2009. And even for my PhD, I was doing electric power engineering, in a way, trying to see whether in Australia we can have 100% renewable grid powering 100% electric vehicles, and purely from the modeling perspective, in a way, to see if such system is feasible and how expensive such system would be. And that is quite technical levers, I would say. And then postdoc starting from 2021, I started to look at the broader sustainability issues, not only in the energy system, not only from the technology innovation, but more from the sustainability perspective, like trying to link our consumption, our behavior change and societal response into that picture. And then that's how I came into this degrowth field. And okay, I think I would be from that industrial ecology community where we talk about lots of footprint. In a way, our lifestyle would be associated with emissions elsewhere through the complicated supply chains. And that's where in that industrial ecology community, we talk about behavior change or reduce consumptions. And that's how actually the two communities overlap, like the post-growth community and the industrial ecology or economic ecology community.
Yeah, well, we're grateful that the both of you have approached the topic in this way, because it's been long overdue, to include a degrowth perspective. So good on you for it's interesting that it's not the old researchers, but it's the young ones that have taken up this cause, and that's really encouraging. I think so. Good on you both. So we're just I had asked Lorenz about what an integrated assessment model is, and he's just given us a quick overview and said that you have greater depth and experience with them, and he's given us a very brief introduction, but you might want to make a comment or two about what integrated assessment models are good for and what they're not good for.
Yes, so integrated assessment model is kind of, I would say, a big simulation tool. And in that tool, it actually links different parts of societies. It includes the physical world, and also the climate and also the energy system, basically everything. And it tries to, it is the best tool available now, trying to answer sort of what if questions. Like, what if we want to live below 1.5 degree? Then what sort of transformations we need from what sort of sectors across the entire economy? Yes, and it is kind of the best tool we have actually to answering those what if questions, and also the adoption.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I had asked this question before, but I'll ask it again with you here, Mengyu, and that is, why haven't we seen degrowth scenarios in any of the IPCC scenarios that have been published for years now? I mean, Lorenz mentioned that, it's really about the IAM community that hasn't addressed it. Either of you have any perspective on why it's taken so long?
Lawrence, do you like to comment?
To comment. So as I said before, like the IPCC only reviews the existing literature, and does not conduct own scenarios or like research in itself. So I think really that there have been some modeling, very early modeling, like by people like Victor and Tim Jackson before, like which went into the direction of like integrated assessment modeling of degrowth scenarios. But these scenarios, for instance, they featured often one economy. I think back then it focused on Canada, and in order to submit to the IPCC, there have to be some criteria fulfilled for the data. So I think there are two issues basically. There was very little modeling being done within the modeling community. And if there was modeling, it didn't really fulfill the criteria to be submitted to the IPCC. And then the question is, of course, okay, why did the IAM community ignore degrowth or post-growth scenarios? On the one hand, I think one has to say, to be fair, okay, degrowth scholarship really is not that old. Like if it really only made a breakthrough in academia after like 2008, 2010.
You're being kind, but that's good.
No, I agree with you. Like there has been stuff before, like with the limits to growth report, and I agree. There's the question. Okay, why was it ignored in the setup of scenarios that were sort of the cornerstone of the IPCC? And for this, we have to say that there's a bias in mainstream economics, which informed, I think, the modeling to a large degree. We in the beginning, if I remember correctly, basically degrowth scenarios where there's either global stagnation or at least decline in economic production and consumption in the global north in rich countries. This was judged as an extreme assumption, like as an implausible assumption and unlikely, and also implicitly as undesirable, I think, because there have been some scenarios actually from before the last assessment report around I think 2017 that were informing sort of the IPCC scenarios. that had a decline or like stagnation in the global north. But these were seen as really negative scenarios, or like they were integrated in a storyline that that made them not reach climate targets because they were and it also the stagnation really only was because of for instance demographic dynamics, and not like a planned or intentional transformation. So degrowth was rather seen as a negative possibility, or like not desirable.
Yeah. Mengyu, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Lawrence just made really comprehensive overview on that. And I guess from modeling perspective, because what we're doing now at Sydney Uni is that we are looking at scenarios, basically, and those, especially those scenarios that are fitting into IPCC reporting standards. And so when you say that is not existing, so I would say from technical perspective, it's because if we look at the existing IAMs, they can't model the growth directly in a way. They have the growth assumption embedded. Like if you look at the one that we're using, so just the context, back to IPCC report, if you look at the scenarios, most of the scenarios are generated by 5 main IAMs globally. So it's not every model we produce using our local IAM gonna be accepted, just like Lawrence made that clear in a way. They have their criteria of what sort of scenarios to be included. And so if you look at that community, 5 global IAMs are the, I would call IPCC compliant IAMs. So if we look at those IAMs, they like, especially if we look at their economic modeling, they often assume, not often, they all assume basically it's growth oriented, like how the equations are written and how, for example, the objective function is written. So objective function is basically when we do optimization, we wanted to have a criteria of which is our best solution, right? And in that sense, they often would assume that consumers or utility would peak when our consumption increases. In plain words, it's basically the more we consume, the higher utility value we would get. So under such model, one cannot really have degrowth scenarios automatically. So that is actually what we are doing. And also Lawrence and Manfred have already reviewed in the Nature Communication paper that we actually need tools available to be able to have the degrowth scenarios. And the silver lining already happened in the last round of IPCC reports, where they actually measured demand side management, and they emphasized and highlighted it's really important to have the engagement, not only from the technology levers, but also how we can change our consumption and production patterns. And that actually was already explicitly mentioned in the last round of IPCC report. So for the new round of like next 5 or 7 years is where that is actually happening in the degrowth community, where we're actually having the modeling groups, I would say, from different countries and trying to produce different set of degrowth scenarios that are going to be included in that round of the reports.
Yeah, so it sounds like that there were worldview issues that prevented the technology from developing, and finally the questions were asked. So why do you think it's even important to consider degrowth? Why did you think it's important enough to put the effort into changing the model, and improving the technology of the model to allow for degrowth, to be able to look at it? Why was it important enough to do all that work, the extra work that you did?
Lawrence?
So I will just quickly share this slide with you. Can you see that slide with the different bars and
Yes.
colors? So this is a great figure from a paper with Mengu that Mengu led in 2023, and I think it summarizes a good response to your question. So why do we think that that degrowth modeling is a good idea or important to do? So this graph basically compares how carbon mitigation modeling, like the scenario on the left side, we basically see how all the integrated assessment models usually reach climate targets. This is sort of through the three levers that I list above. The blue is basically economic growth. It means like we have aggregate service changes, we have more production, more consumption, while at the same time the dark dots represent the total net emission reduction that we see in those scenarios, and the different levers pointing or like going below in red, yellow, and gray are the different mitigation levers basically that are applied to reduce the emissions. And very prominently, we have basically renewable energy, energy efficiency, and then you have some negative emissions to suck carbon out of the air, store it underground, for instance. And what we see is
Excuse me,
basically,
Lorenz, can I just ask for clarification of what does the blue mean, the aggregate services change?
yeah, that basically means the aggregate amount of production and consumption going on. How
Okay,
much, that's basically a representation for economic growth.
thank you.
Yeah. And basically what this sort of green growth approach embodies is that in order to reach the climate targets, those three technological mitigation approaches, they have to work really hard. Like you have to assume really strong, large scale energy efficiency gains, negative emissions, renewable energy, that are beyond what we have experienced in the past. And with those levers come risks, right? Like we have it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of land, as well as it has other problems, right? We have international justice issues. Lots of the resources come from indigenous land. So there are lots of issues with that.
And
Um,
it takes a lot of emissions as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you basically if you have such a green growth path, you can it's very hard it's to mitigate in the short term. So what happens in the models is that over time so in the short term it means more emissions because you have more production going on with fossil fuel heavy um, energy systems. And this is compensated over the long term by the negative emissions, which later, I mean, you see here, like it's in the representation, like it starts around 2050, really. That later you compensate for this by taking out carbon from the air, which is very speculative because we don't have the technology on that scale and in that stage. So it's really speculative in the end. And of course, if you have large scale energy systems of renewable energy to build up, that takes also more emissions, more materials. So this we contrast with the degrowth logic, which basically means you have stagnation or actually small declines of aggregate services. And this means that you don't need to compensate all of that by larger technological mitigation, but instead you can have less of renewable energies, less of energy efficiency, and less of negative emissions. You might still need all of these three, but to a much lesser degree. And this is basically shown in the shading here, that you have a lot lower feasibility concerns, and I would add sustainability and justice concerns. Of course, I mean, we can talk about what this implies, but the degrowth scenario would also obviously be politically very demanding, and would also require that inequality, for instance, declines massively in order to safeguard well-being for everyone. But yeah, this just on your question, why we think degrowth modeling is important to do.
Yeah, well, those are very, very striking results. And Mengyu, would you like to add anything to that? Why don't you put that back up, Lorenz? I think it's worth
Okay.
examining a little more just to make sure that we all understand it, because it's I think some really interesting data there. Do you want to add anything, Mengyu?
Yep, just on that one, Lawrence and Manfred published a really fantastic paper on degrowth. And Lawrence, if you go to slide 16, I think that there's one.
So bear with me.
Okay.
This one?
Yeah, this one, yes. So this is a very like well cited graph from Lawrence and Manfred paper. Where basically we have like x-axis representing the decoupling of the energy and GDP, and the y-axis representing the renewable expansion. And we have those different dots. So those dots are actually the scenarios that meet 1.5 degree examined by IPCC. So all those dots are basically what we need to achieve if we want to live below 1.5 degree. And the size of the circles are actually the negative emission technology that we need in order to have cumulative negative emissions. And so basically from this graph, if you go to the right and top corner, that basically leads you to somewhere where you need technology to have the magic, basically, and to get us 1.5 degree. And if you look at the bottom left, there are black dots. So those are actually what we did in the history. So basically, if you look at those colored dots and those black dots, that clearly says something, because history, like from historically, we didn't do much things, but that is all of a sudden that we need to do if we want to reach 1.5 degree, and this is what the IP scenarios are actually talking about. So if you look at this graph, then naturally you would ask one question, that is, what if we just can't rely totally on the technology magic, and then what other solutions we can rely on? That is, to me, is myself, like my journey to post-growth modeling community. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's really interesting, because what the data very clearly show is that there's a lot less risk associated with a degrowth scenario in terms of how much renewable energy we would have to produce, the emissions associated with that in the short term, and much less risk in terms of relying on technology that is wishful thinking at this point, basically. I mean, it's a silly thing to be basing the safety of your civilization on. So
Yes.
yeah.
Just on that, about the magnitude of the technology improvement we're talking about on this graph of those colorful dots. So about the negative emission technologies, we need hundreds times of expansion. For the renewables, we need 10 times, more than 10 times of the expansion of what we did in history. So that is what the magnitude of the technology improvement we are talking about. Because I feel like in the when people talk about degrowth or post-growth, people would say, you don't rely on technology. And that actually, to me, is not the case, because we, of course, would need technology improvement, but it's just the magnitude of the technology.
Yeah, the magnitude is significant. Yeah, it's really, really interesting to actually see that degree of difference in the different scenarios. And of course, there's all these benefits in terms of less risk and so on, and less environmental damage and social damage. But the key thing is that we actually can mitigate the emissions, and hopefully avoid, moving into a really risky heat zone. Yeah. No, those are really interesting slides. And just to point out to everyone viewing that the references for these studies and these graphs are at the bottom of the slides, and they will all be available online on our websites later, so you can go to the articles and get into more detail if you're interested in pursuing that. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one small thing. Sorry, Jack.
Please, please.
Just to emphasize, like the graph I showed before with the different bars and
Yeah.
colors. This was not like this specific graph is not actual data. This is just a graphical representation of basically the different projects.
Okay.
And this is actual data that we modeled with.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very helpful. Okay, so this graph is the actual data.
Yeah, we actually have we have a specific representation of that with actual data of the graph that I showed before. This is basically the same graph, but with actual data. This is in a different paper, but just so you know, like this is the actual data, and the other one is just the graphical representation.
Yeah, and we can see all the technologies there listed that would need to be scaled up if the green growth approach were to be pursued.
Yeah, exactly. Like here on the left side, you have the green growth scenarios. On the right side, you have the stagnation and shrinkage scenarios. This is just for Australia now, but it shows the same thing. Like you need a lot less of all the technological levers than in the green growth scenarios.
Yeah. Now, these seem to me to be incredibly important findings. So my question is, what's the reaction been in the climate community and the political community and the IAM community to your work? Because you've done a number of studies in this area, and we're just highlighting some of the main features. But what's the reaction been?
I would say it's difficult to say the reactions are good or bad in that sense, but to us, like because we based in Australia, right? So the very recent good news that we received just 2 weeks ago was that we actually won Australia government funded discovery project on this topic of developing degrowth futures for Australia. So
that's great news. Congratulations.
Thank you. So I guess the positive side of thing is that it's the first government funded degrowth project in Australia. And that which I think is a positive sign.
Very positive, very positive.
Yes.
Yeah, and really congratulations in achieving that. I think that's a significant step, and may it be the first of many.
Thank you for that. And in terms of the modeling community, I actually have a few slides if I can share my models. I can
Yeah,
share
I've allowed you all to screen share, so you should be able to put your slides up.
Yeah, so it's just like some of the background slides that I've collected. So about the DEGROWTH community, this was from the DEGROWTH conference I attended this year. Lawrence was there, and actually it has more than 1,000 participants in Europe, actually across the world, more than 50.
Yeah, I think most of us are familiar with that event. Yeah.
Yes, so we actually presented the DEGROWTH scenarios in a way that DEGROWTH scenario modeling was the special session in that conference where I can see more and more researchers are working in this field, including the people from IAMs. So that is.
And have there been any critiques of the methodology? I mean, given that you've done some highly technical work to allow the degrowth option to even be considered in the IAM, I would suspect that there's a lot of complexity there and open to criticism. Are there any weaknesses that have been exposed in your work since it's been published?
I would say for every peer-reviewed paper, there would always be limitations in the
Of course,
theoretical.
of course. No,
Yeah.
we understand that part, yeah. But
And
anything that would make you concerned about the results that you've come up with?
yes and no. So in terms of
Okay.
there are theoretical limitations. Every model is wrong in that sense because
Of
every model
course, of course.
trying to model something that are simplified. So same as what we did that we produced first set of the DEGROWTH scenarios where for example, like we didn't consider commodity details when we assume consumer preferences and what but there's always different angle to state one thing because the problem is too big and in a way like if we based on what the IAM community has agreed on, that is we use one of the 5 main IAMs for IPCC. So we based on that and we try to change the model so that degrowth can be modeled on that basis. So in that way, there are always limitations. In a way, we don't consider, for example, detailed commodities, but that is the default assumption of the IAM, that specific IAM. So in that sense, I personally didn't receive critics, but more or less we measure it in a scientific sense. It's the limitation of the model we establish and what this model can solve or answer in terms of specific questions. And the other different questions, they probably need different models to answer. So I would more frame it this way.
Sure. Okay. No, that's helpful. But one of the things I'm taking away is that the major results in terms of lower risk with degrowth, more likelihood of actually achieving climate targets, safety targets, those results have not really come into serious question.
Well, I mean, when we talk about feasibility, it actually relates to another slide that I prepared. So this was also happened recently, like months ago, where in Australia we had this UN Global Compact conference. So it basically gathered people, especially business people like CEOs in different companies who are interested in sustainability, into one room, and we actually organized a debate, degrowth versus green growth, for example. And we had 4 people And this is Manfred and me. We work on degrowth, of course, in our research, but in that debate, we have to argue degrowth won't work.
Yes,
So
sure.
that was kind of the interesting bit of that special session. And actually, we won.
I'm not surprised. Well, another congratulations.
But I mean, so for answering your question, like when you say degrowth would be leading to feasibility concern or not, the honest answer is yes, of course, because of the geopolitical tension, because of how everything is structured in our current economy. It's basically growth embedded, even in our education system. So and when we talk about degrowth, for example, like we're talking about degrowth in one country or in global north, or if global south would need to be part of the conversation or not. So it's so complicated, and degrowth is like in our sense, it's not going to be happening like tomorrow. So that is kind of, I think to answer that question, whether to say degrowth is feasible or not is kind of not practical, because that is, to me, is not the point of discussion, because ultimately degrowth or post-degrowth world actually offers alternative way of thinking and organizing and framing our economy, and how we can limit, for example, our impacts from human behavior into the entire planet, and that I think is the valuable point, because it opens that discussion and basically free our mind to look at what exactly is the problem, and then how we can, or what sort of thing we can do to improve it. But to me, it doesn't mean degrowth is gonna be a perfect solution either. So I'm gonna stop in here to see if Lawrence has something to add.
I agree. I mean, the point is we don't know how to do degrowth. I mean, we have some general ideas, but it's never been done. So we're in very, very new territory. I'm going to, in a minute, open up the, yeah, go ahead, Lorenz, if you want
Sorry.
to add something. I was going to ask if anyone want to add anything.
Sorry, just to shortly add, like I think Mengyu said basically everything. Just to add, like also for me, there has been surprisingly little criticism of sort of the basic statements that we did, like in terms of this technological feasibility stuff that we talked about with the graphs and all. This has basically not come under criticism. Because I think it's quite robust. And honestly, like before we did this modeling, I was thinking, okay, I mean, this is kind of clear, no? Like if we consume less, we will need to replace less energy use by renewable energy. We could do this faster. We have less feasibility concerns and stuff. So I thought, okay, it's kind of obvious. But now that it's interesting to also see, okay, what happens when you put some numbers on things, when you do some modeling, suddenly everyone takes it seriously. So this was an interesting experience for me. And we didn't get criticized for this. What we get, or what you get criticized for, or what like then the doubt is what Mengyu talked about, is like more like social political feasibility, that this is a different kind of challenge then.
Yes.
So you can say, okay, technologically, degrowth in the sustainability sense, degrowth would be a lot more feasible. But then you have the whole political discussion, power coming into play, etc. So this is a different discussion. In terms of feedback we got from the wider community, I also would say that the integrated assessment community seems to me to be quite open actually to these kind of discussions. I had the feeling from my experiences, conversations, that it was more like, okay, true, we missed something there. It's an opportunity to have more diversity and more storylines about different kinds of assumptions. So there is, as Meng, you said, there is a lot of interesting work being done right now, and in the coming months and years, we will see a lot of cool stuff happening, I think. There's also some pickup by climate scientists on these kind of discussions, which I find very positive. Where I have seen like less interest from is more like from politicians or something. There has been stuff happening like with the Beyond Growth conference in the European Parliament, for instance. But this is, I would say, the engagement is still quite limited, and yeah, if there is engagement, then it's from single politicians being interested. For instance,
Yeah.
with our organization, DEGROWTH Switzerland, we had some requests by left-green politicians to engage with
Sure.
that work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm encouraged to hear that the science and the methodology is regarded as robust. And as you say, it shifts the focus to the power issues and the political issues. And what in fact you've done is given NGOs like the people present some ammunition, some very robust ammunition. So we thank you for that. Just before I open it up to questions from the participants, is there anything else either of you would like to add about the studies that we've been discussing or the issues in general that you'd like to add before we open it up?
Maybe just to emphasize again one thing that Mengyu said, that I think one of the key results of our research is that although like degrowth and sufficiency, this helps a lot, I think, with feasibility. I think we also show that you really need everything you can get. Like we really need also technological efficiency gains, renewables, and to a small degree, probably also negative emissions to balance things like unavoidable emissions from agriculture. So we need all levers we can get, but we also need sufficiency. And if you then look at, okay, we didn't really talk about what happens to well-being in these kind of scenarios like degrowth. What our research also shows is that you can maintain sort of a decent living standard. I think yeah, you might have talked about this with Ian Go. You can maintain a decent standard of well-being with significantly less energy use, and this is also covered in our degrowth scenarios. But it really means that you need energy efficiency, and you really need also massively reducing inequality. Because if you don't do that, then there will be some segments that will fall below that standard.
Yeah, that's another whole topic I think we need to cover in a separate webinar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mengyu, did you want to add
emphasize
anything
that.
before we open it up?
I think we like, I'm happy of what we discussed, and just the one thing is where degrowth and post-growth and interaction with other alternative ways of post-growth is kind of, we didn't discuss. Of course, it could be different topics, but just to mention that within that post-growth, like community or like ways of thinking, degrowth could be one of the ways, and there could be also alternative ways where one would say economy doesn't need to, or GDP doesn't need to degrow, or that doesn't need to grow. We just don't need to care about it that much. So I'll just try to mention that degrowth specifically, we're talking about actually GDP decreasing in that sense.
Right.
That's sort of the scope that what we're talking about.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So here's the point where we open it up to questions from those who are attending. If you could use the tools put your hand up, or I don't seem to be able to get everyone on the to see everyone. So if anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment.
So they use the react button, the one with the heart at the bottom, to get your hand. And I do have a list of everybody, Jack.
Yeah, there,
a few-
Lindsay, okay, that's great. Lindsay, I think, has his hand up. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Cheers, Jack. I'll kick the ball rolling. Hey, thanks. It's a real privilege to be on I'm a fly on the wall for this discussion and to get a little bit of insight into your wonderful research. My question sort of sits in the middle of the recent discussion about social connotations and so on. Whenever there's a discussion in the normal world about degrowth and that sort of thing, it almost always is responded by, we can't do that without economic collapse. And I wondered, I don't buy into that, but I wondered if your modeling had encompassed much on the economic impacts of it, A, and B, on the transition path between where we are now and where we have to get to.
Which one of you wants to start?
You go,
maybe-
or you want to start?
Yeah, maybe just a few seconds, and then I'll leave to Lawrence. So
Go ahead, Mingu. Yeah.
So just to mention, it's kind of question maybe related to how we can best degrow in a way, right? And to me, like it's totally depending on the economic and political context of a specific country or specific region. And I think that is what is kind of underexplored in the degrowth community about how we can reach there, basically, through what sort of transformations in which sectors. But just on that one, we're actually looking at how or to what extent degrowth could be happening in global south, even because we have big economies in global south where, say, some countries, some regions are really highly developed, but not all of them. So there are inequalities happening, and that even within that kind of big economy, degrowth could be happening, for example, on a region-specific way. So in that sense, I would like to frame it in a more flexible way. Maybe there's no specific way that we have to do this, we have to do that. But just on that perspective, what is discussed in the research community is kind of, for example, through public provisioning. Like there are some major transformations that we can target on, like how we can boost, for example, public transportation, etc., etc. So there are some well understood mechanisms of how we design a post degrowth world or like degrowth world that can actually function well and actually function a better way to improve the well-being of the entire society. So, and that actually can also contribute to solving the inequality problems within one specific region, nation, or even globally.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Lorenz, go ahead.
On that. So I also encounter this a lot. Thanks for the question. That sort of degrowth is set equal with an economic collapse, or like said, okay, this will lead to an economic collapse. And I mean, in theory, like degrowth theory is arguing, okay, we really want to avoid that collapse. We want to avoid a recession, right, by having this planned transition towards an economy of enough donut economy, a post-growth, degrowth economy. In our modeling, I mean, theoretically, yes, we model economic impacts, and especially in the recent modeling with Mengyu, that is a bit more. That's a lot more complicated with a complex integrated assessment model that we didn't use in the other paper we published before. So there is sort of some transition dynamics and stuff modeled. But that's on a very rough level and on a very very high level macro perspective that does not cover lots, I mean, basically all the political and social dynamics that are behind sort of these macro variables, right? Like we model, okay, energy use goes down, all across all economic sectors, we see a decline. So what we model is a lot more closer to a recession than to an actual sort of degrowth scenario, because we, for instance, we do not differentiate between sectors, which is not good, right? Because you would like to maybe shrink more the aviation sector, but less agriculture, for instance. So there's a lot more work to do in that. There's tons of limitations, and I really would emphasize that, like with these integrated assessment models, like most of the social, political dynamics, as Mengyu said, also geopolitical stuff, we cannot model. And in an ideal transition, you would have a more or less smooth transition towards a different economy. But I mean, yeah, I think if you account for the complexities of society, of the complexity of the economy, with also power dynamics and inequalities and all of that, then yeah, personally, I think it's more likely to see like mixtures of different transition dynamics. For some regions, it might have elements of collapse, depending on how strong, for instance, social movements for degrowth are, how strong the mobilization for this is. Whereas in other regions, you might have more ideal smooth transition dynamics. And I think this all depends on the situation at hand, and it's really hard to say. But ideally, you would like to avoid that.
Yeah, but at least your work gets people thinking about these things, which is a major step in contribution. Yeah, you've got your hand up. You McMurray, go ahead. You.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. And I had a question related to the figure with the coloured spots, the coloured dots. And what I understood was that the size of the coloured dot indicates the gigatons of carbon which would need to be removed from the atmosphere under those various scenarios. And in the legend, I saw that the gigatons of carbon were like 400, 600, 800, 1200. And what I remember Susan Krondike saying in her energy systems engineering course was that she estimated that a failure load of carbon in the atmosphere was 800 gigatons. And so it kind of looks to me like those amounts of carbon are enormous and that are assumed to be removed under those different scenarios. And what I really wonder is that feasible? Is there any possible way we could do that by any means that we know of now? Or have I misunderstood the figure?
Yeah, so I'll try to add a few sentences. So the current technology that we can remove the carbon from the air is roughly speaking 50 megaton of CO2. So that is our current technology, like we call it carbon capture and storage technologies. And what we need in those scenarios on average would be 3.5 gigatons. So if you compare 3.5 gigaton with 15 megaton, so that is kind of the magnitude of the technology we need. So and I also talk to people who are actually doing those technologies. So of course, it is important in a way that we have technology being improved, and those people are actually getting lots of funding, and they develop direct air capture technologies and chemical, I don't know, like lab works, simulations and this sort of thing. But just think about the hundreds times of the improvement that we need. So that to me definitely is a question mark.
And a related question is there an energy cost associated with that carbon capture from the atmosphere, and
Of course.
how serious is that energy cost?
Energy cost, or I feel like in degrowth communities, we actually always talk about the material consumptions we need, and also the critical minerals we need in order to have this large scale of infrastructures ready, and that are completely over the planetary boundaries that we, in a way, like we actually already exceeding the material consumption planetary boundaries. So cost, like the pure economic cost is one thing, and technology improvement is one thing, but the think about the material and criminal, like those restrictions of whether we are actually able to produce that amount of infrastructure itself is also questionable to me as well.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to really shortly add on this, because I see we have many questions also in the chat. I totally agree with what Mengyu said. But there's also a huge energy cost to these technologies, and it depends a bit on which technology, because you can have lots of different ways to take carbon out of the air. But I would emphasize is all of them have the downsides. So like you can have bioenergy, where you basically plant a lot of trees and then burn those trees and take the carbon and pump it underground. Bioenergy to carbon capture and storage, that's called. This takes lots of land, fertilizer, etc. But you could also have like direct air capture, where there's technology built to directly take carbon from the air, and this is extremely energy intensive, right? So everything has their costs, has its costs, and I agree that the amounts of negative emissions in those scenarios is beyond what I can imagine. And also really unjust, because it really burdens, like, okay, the future generations, you can deal with that waste, figure out a way to have those 500, 1,000 gigatons removal in total. So per year, that's like, I don't know, between 3 and 10 gigatons, depending on the scenario. So yeah, it's really unjust as well.
Yeah, and if
Okay.
we keep in mind that, the carbon in the air is in parts per million. So, removing that, you've got to move a lot of air as well. Neva K, go ahead with your question. Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yep. Hi guys, thank you. That was really cool to hear about your work, and I'm really excited to see it in a future IPCC report. So my question is, I'm just gonna lower my hand. My question is, you have talked about technology that we will need still in a degrowth scenario. And so are we looking at just the rollout and implementation of our current technologies like solar panels, wind, etc.? Or are we still looking at specific future technologies that you are estimating are necessary, and what do those look like and in what quantities, for example? And if I was to be telling game designers to showcase these futures, what would that look like?
Go ahead, Mengyu. Did you want to start?
Yeah, there's actually one slide related to this question. that I prepared. So this is the scenarios we developed for Australia, and this is already published, where we modified one of the 5 main IAMs to make it degrowth compatible. And in that way, we actually modeled detailed technologies. So this is, of course, aggregated thing, but in total, we modeled, for example, like roughly 150-ish technologies that we are having and that we might have. So the good thing about IAM is basically we can portray what sort of technologies we could have. And then if we have certain emission budgets, for example, we calculate in our Australian case, what would be the carbon budget, like 100, like a 1.5 degree carbon budget. So we, for example, like if we use this 4 gigaton of cumulative emissions from 2020 to 2100, we basically can calculate what sort of technologies we need. So we considered different scenarios. In a way, we consider the default growth scenario. So in the growth scenarios, so that is basically the most left-hand side bars of one set. So in the growth scenarios, because our demand is increasing, right? So that we would need to have technologies expand, and that especially is at a huge scale when we towards the end of the century, because we actually, for example, need negative emission technologies so that we are meeting our 4 gigaton carbon budget. And then if we gradually move to the right-hand side of the bars, so that is where we started to model a limited growth scenario. So that is middle bars. And then to the very right-hand side, that is the degrowth scenario. In a way, we assume, for example, Australia per capita consumption needs to degrow to 10K per capita. So the current level is 40K. So 10K is definitely a degrowth scenario. So as you can see, if we gradually move to our right-hand side, especially to the most right-hand side one, so that is extreme degrowth scenario, where we can see those colored bars, they refer to different technologies. They would require less and less. So to answer your question, if we need new technologies or not, the answer is not always yes or not always no. It's really depending on what kind of budget we're talking about, and also what kind of policy we're having. And that would all lead to different technology combinations, even under degrowth scenarios. So in that extreme sense, even in degrowth scenarios, yes, we did use technologies. So that is actually why we need to model different kind of contexts or scenarios so that we can prepare ourselves, even within that degrowth future context.
Okay, Lorenz, did you want to add anything to that?
Just really shortly, I think that like in most of these scenarios, like degrowth scenarios, I think you can, from what I know also on the research on decent living standards, where basically these scenarios of how much energy you need to satisfy basic human needs, these scenarios, they work mostly with existing technology. So it's really just using the best in class of technologies that already exist, and then generalize these existing technologies, efficient technologies, globally, which makes a huge difference already. Just using existing efficient tech makes a huge difference. I think that if you look then very specifically on sectors, yeah, there might be tech that does not exist, that is useful, like specifically if we look at for instance steel production, cement, aviation that can make sense to develop, because even though you might not need as much of these sectors as we use today, that you might still want to have a certain degree of these products and production going on, and then it makes sense to develop a new tech that reduces the environmental impacts. But I think relying is something completely different. That to say, okay, we rely in our scenario on completely huge degrees of new tech, that without which we would really break all the climate targets. I think this is a difference, like to say, okay, the degree to which you rely on these technologies. And our argument is basically that the degrowth scenario can really reduce that reliance massively, even though you might still need some degree of that tech.
Okay, good, thank you. Margie Jean Malcolm, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Go ahead.
Kia ora. Sorry, just juggling the screen here for a second. Yeah, very exciting research that you're doing, and very exciting that you've got some government money to build on that. What's really struck me listening to you at my more simplistic brain level of the key messages about lower risk and greater certainty, that we can make a difference, that we can achieve something. And I guess I'm interested in how transdisciplinary your research team is, because it feels to me that there's a lot of scope for somebody within your team being focused on the mental models and the mindset shifts that are actually needed for any kind of systems change around this. Because we know that, we talked a lot about the sort of the political will that's got to change, but a lot of that will be about building this constituency of people who actually understand the difference between the dominant narrative of growth is good and, oh, we're very worried if GDP isn't going up and all of those sorts of things. And seems to me that somebody focused on the science communication around this would be a fantastic addition to your team if that's possible, because that feels like a key lever for change when we think about the compelling messages that can actually help people make a mindset or a mental model shift.
Any comments there?
Thank you so much for that comment. I totally agree with you. Like transdisciplinary research and more science communication is extremely important. And for instance, I think on science communication we could still do a lot better. Like for instance, in our team at UNIL, we just recently discovered our university does not actually have a person to for instance, write press releases, which is, I mean, it's not good. So we are trying to change that. But also our team is a lot more at least multidisciplinary than it looks right now. We also have people who do qualitative social science with for instance union members in the German car industry, and to actually research exactly how does different visions of a good life manifest in those unions. And there are some very interesting entry points, like to focus more on working time reduction as a key part of a good life, and away from having always more money and more consumption. So I would think that there is some really good stuff being done more in the participatory research, transdisciplinary research direction. Although
Right.
we personally we are not doing that kind of research.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you want to add anything to?
Yes, just kind of brainstorming that we did, because like we engaged in some workshops where at Sydney Uni we tried to introduce degrowth to people, to different researchers, and they could be doing technology development, they could be in design, like art department, and some of in history, and some of them that they are actually focusing on, I don't know, say Chinese poetry, for example, like kind of research. And when I propose such research topic to them, the very interesting thing is, I feel like many people are actually really interested in this kind of research, and there's kind of like limited room for them to express that kind of desire of doing such research. And one very cool thing that we brainstormed was how, for example, we designed local way like living, like a community way of living under degrowth context, like as an experiment. And very cool thing, like from other people who are doing Chinese studies, and they actually said there are people already doing that in China, for example, where after a certain age, where they have already accumulated a certain amount of money they think would be enough, I guess, and then they actually choose to move together. They live together, like with, for example, 20 people, like self-organized. Then they distribute food locally, and they share foods, and they share good time, and they don't really, spend lots of time working anymore. It's a kind of really spontaneous way of organizing everything together automatically in a way that is actually under the spirit of degrowth. So I find it really fascinating. And I feel like it would be good actually to have people from completely different backgrounds, where we probably can shape different components of how the society would work, especially also navigate different political and economic contexts. And that could be really fascinating.
Mengyu, is there anything written about that Chinese example you mentioned that you could put in the chat as a link?
That is kind of like, then I need to double confirm, but that's kind of like documentary as far as I recall. And also they do some field research, so they invest their time and go to local communities and ask them why you make such decisions, why you move from busy areas like big cities, and why you choose to live together like 20 people. They actually don't know each other that well before. So I think it's really...
No, these are really, I think these are really interesting and important examples. And if you could send any references, we'll make sure they get on the website for where the webinar is going to be. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Neil, go ahead. I know you've got another meeting to go to, and we only have a few minutes left, and we want to get Molly in as well. Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much, Jack. Yeah, thanks. That was a really interesting presentation there. And just a couple of quick points. I think we all agree that nutrient or energy dense diets are an evolutionary mismatch. And I think, people see the health impacts of that with obesity and diabetes and have no problem sort of understanding this. But there is a problem understanding that there's a huge evolutionary mismatch between our energy dense environments, which are harming us. And I've included a quick graph in the chat, but basically even at the current levels, and even if we were to decrease them of energy consumption in the global north, we're getting all sorts of damage, not only for our ecology with the overshoot, but very poor health outcomes and social outcomes and loss of pro-sociality. We're in a classic tainter energy complexity spiral. We've got mismatching and trapping going all over the place. And of course, we've got Howard Odum's maximum power principle to think of. And no one sort of thinks about this. It's a classic inverted U, but people think that that we have to somehow maintain energy and that it provides all these benefits. And they look at simplistic benefit models that really don't reflect the reality. So that was one point I wanted to make. And the second point is it looks as though
Neil,
in Australia
Neil, excuse me, can I just stop you there so that they can respond and we can fit Molly in before we have to close. If you want to put your additional question in the chat, we'll see if we can get some response to it. Okay, but why don't Lorenz and Mengyu give a quick response to that, and then we'll make sure we get Molly in as well.
Maybe just a quick 1 or 2 sentences. So in the research community, it is kind of getting some attractions to actually develop energy models or even climate models that considers human behavior change. So that is kind of ongoing development in research fields itself.
Yeah. Okay, Lorenz, any quick comment?
Thanks, Neil. You also sent some very interesting things via mail before. Thank you so much. Just to comment on the graph you shared in the chat, it's interesting to me that this U shape really is something that basically like I think in some sense we implemented that in our modeling with Mengyu, that we really have a U-shaped utility function that basically says, okay, once we I just share that here. So that's on the bottom basically, where if we increase consumption of goods 1 and 2, these are the darker, the brighter the color gets, the higher is
Oh dear.
utility, basically the optimize as a society, or where we're striving for as a utility in a very abstract sense. And so what we basically implemented is that once you cross a certain point, like this yellow area, and you go further in consumption, then utility decreases again. So there is a basically optimal point which we choose at different consumption levels, like 10K, 20K, something like that. And this basically implements, I think, your idea that when you cross a certain point, there come environmental destruction, social costs, all of that, which make additional growth and consumption not useful. Like this is the idea of daily, like uneconomic growth. Like and this is maybe just interesting to note.
Yeah. Okay, we actually are at the end time, but Molly, can you make a very quick comment or question?
I just wondered whether green wall projects in which trees are grown deliberately to alter the climate over large regions, whether they count as carbon capture. I'm thinking of the Sahara Desert, which the first green wall effort was not very successful, but I gather that it has been modified and is working quite well. And of course, you have the Chinese example, which has been well publicized. These are labor intensive. They do put forests on the ground for the main purpose of controlling the atmosphere, modifying the humidity, and basically changing the whole dynamic of biological growth. Do they count as carbon capture? Because they do it.
No. We do talk about.
Comment on this. Just shortly, as I understand your question, it's basically it's asking whether afforestation, reforestation, these kind of projects count as carbon removal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
carbon positive.
Yeah. So the short answer to this, I believe, is that in the models, at least, there is a large part of the carbon removal is done by afforestation and reforestation. But then I guess it's really, I mean, in reality, it's really hard to discern the sort of additionality of these projects that really, like, I mean, okay, if you use it as a direct like offset technology, I think there's lots of problems with that because it's and then the problem is, okay, I mean, you in the, I mean, in Australia you have lots of wildfires and all of that, so the permanence of these projects really is a question. But in the models, afforestation, reforestation is a carbon removal strategy. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We're going over, but I'd like to honor everyone's time, so
Yes.
we'll give you our heartfelt thanks for this presentation, not only the presentation, but the work you've been doing. And it is so encouraging to see young researchers doing this stuff. You know, I can't castigate you for not doing it sooner. You would have been in diapers, but our generation should have been doing it. But I'm glad you're catching up, and may you go far with it. We'll be following your work with interest, and we'll be using it to enter the political, domain and challenge the current mindsets and power structures, and use the information and the robustness of it is really important to that effort. So thanks. And Beverly will close with a short karakia.
Yes, it's a climate karakia from Te Arawa, and it's short. Ka tohia ngā rau o Onamata. Ka tohia ngā rau o ngā iaia. Raurangia he kete mā tauranga mō Anamata. Gather the leaves of the past, gather the leaves of the present, weave a basket of knowledge for the future.
Thank you all.
Thank
Be well, everyone, and happy solstice.
Thank you so much.
Presentation.
you.
Thank you. Okay. Take care all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.